Okay. Welcome to join today's Velero community meeting. First of all, for some overall status update, we have created way 1.13.1 RC release on March 11th, and we will create the GA build today. And for way 1.14, we have finished the second round candidate reviewing, and most of them have included in the 1.14 milestone, and there are some deferred ones, so you can review them, and if required, if need, you can start discussions on them, and we can further check whether we include in the 1.14 milestone or not. And there are still several of them in the candidate queue, and I think Daniel will go through them later in this meeting. That's overall status. For some individual updates, myself is working on the design for data mover microservice, and right now most of the POCs have been done. So I will create the doc very soon. So from my side, and Jianjun, please.
I think Xun is joining the meeting soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Jimin, please.
Yeah, I'm doing a make parallel restore configurable for copier uploader, and also I'm doing the digital download fails during restore bugs. It is from my side.
Okay, thanks. And Wenkai.
Yeah, I'm preparing the version 1.13.1 release, and I will G it today. That's all.
Okay. And Shiva, please.
Yeah, addressed some feedback regarding volume policies extension design implementation last week. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll take a look soon.
Yeah, Daniel. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. That's for the status update. This discussion topics. So Daniel, you want to go through the remaining candidates, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Could you open or let me share the screen. That may be easy. Give me 1 minute. Yeah, as we are I think hitting the feature freeze milestone today, I just want to go through all the candidates, and there are a few of them that I'm not very sure. Those are owned by Shuban and Red Hat folks. For these three, do you have any concern putting them into the 1.14 milestone? Since this one mainly focusing on the design of these two. Scott and Tiger, what's your opinion on these?
So I'm currently working on the design for that first one. Kind of the design is in progress. So I'll have a PR at some point. I think for now we can keep that. You know, with again for the design only in the milestone. There's no implementation planned within 1.14. So we're
Sure. So yeah. So if the goal is only to creating the design, you have no problem putting this in 1.14 milestone, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the same for me.
Okay.
Design only, probably fine. We'll have more discussions later.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, as for this one, Shuban, I think this is just adding a warning message, but yeah, I'm not sure in what scenario that is that because it's causing any confusion.
So basically, if you have a backup where user has stated that they want to do FS backup for all the volumes, and if during restore the same user adds restore PVs as true, it's not applicable to FS backup volumes. So in that case, we should add a warning.
So what will happen if you do not have a warning?
We just had a customer scenario where they're expecting a to happen. Like it gave a false sense that restore PVs implies we are restoring PVs even though there were no snapshots.
Yeah, I I know it's a break change, but by design, this is only for controlling the snapshot restore or
Yeah. I totally understand that. So that's why just a warning. I can add more details if you want on the issue.
uh, yeah. No disagreement to add more details, but I'm just not sure because considering we also support opt-in, opt-out, and later you're implementing the volume policy. So
Yeah.
only checking
Yeah.
this one flag may be insufficient. So I'm thinking,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm wondering, and a different approach we could take. I don't know, Shubham, if this would help solve this. Because the thing I always notice about this parameter is that the naming is kind of unfortunate. This is really the restore equivalent to snapshot volumes.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether we should maybe instead of this, and maybe not for 1.14 since we're kind of late, but maybe we should create a new parameter called restore snapshot volumes, and then deprecate restore PVs and make it clear that the two mean the same thing. And so that way that way, if a
Yeah.
user is saying restore PVs, they'll get a warning saying this is deprecated, use restore snapshot volumes instead. That the new parameter name kind of documents the expectation better than restore PVs does. I wonder if that's a better approach.
I'm
In other words, create a new parameter that's better named, that's accurate, restore snapshot volumes, and then deprecate restore PV, or then if they use it, they get a deprecation warning saying you should use restore snapshot volumes instead.
yeah, I think printing it in the server log is not very explicit because while user using it, they will not read the server log. So
no. We could add that as a restore warning, right? Not just server logs. So when you do a describe restore, the warning will be there, right?
Yeah. Although, yeah, it might be better. Again, I'm thinking instead of a generic warning, we should probably just make steps to actually, because part of the problem is the parameter itself is badly named. It's confusing to users. So if we create a new parameter that's more accurate, and then deprecate the old parameter,
But in terms of the expectation, the user want to use this flag to control all the volumes, not only the snapshot, right?
but
I
it
don't
doesn't,
think
right, but it doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
So that's why I guess that's what I'm saying is the expectation. Basically, the name gives them a wrong expectation because the name suggests setting a false will not restore any PVs, but this parameter is only used to affect snapshot volumes.
Yeah, I agree. So if we focus on the expectation,
Mhm.
I think it may be slightly better that we change the behavior, although it's a break change, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that any user would choose not to restore any
Okay, so
snapshotted
you want to say
snapshots
that
rather than
the restore PV
yeah.
should also be applicable to FS backup,
Yeah,
FS history.
yeah,
But
whatever.
the problem there is that we have snapshot volumes, which is again the equivalent right now
Restore
on the
PVs,
backup
yeah.
side, and that only affects snapshots, not FS backup. It sounds like we may want to overhaul both of these parameters in a few ways in the future, because I think the problem now is they're inconsistent.
But I don't worry too much about the consistency or equivalence in terms of the parameter in backup and restore. I think it's not very confusing to me if there's some flag in backup but doesn't exist in restore. as long as they are, self-explanatory enough to themselves.
So that's what
Given
Scott's
there's
suggesting.
already snapshot volume flag in the backup and it controls snapshot, I think no confusion it will cause. But the restore PV is what is causing the confusion. It was, created to be the counterpart of the snapshot flag, but it looks like it should control all the PV and people use it that way. So I think it may be better we change the behavior to make it control all the PV restoration. What do you guys think? Although it's a break change.
I guess I would wonder, and maybe this is where, since the customer case hit this on the Red Hat side here, we wonder what their goal was. Maybe did this customer want to not restore anything and would actually skipping all PV contents, both FS backup and snapshots? Would that be what they wanted, or were they just confused? Or both? I mean, because right, basically, I think we're kind of saying something similar. The parameter name doesn't match the behavior. The question is, do we change the name to and preserve behavior, or do we change the behavior to match what the name implies? Or do we do both? I mean, do we want to make a new parameter that has the current behavior that's just snapshots? If we need that, there may not be a use case for that. I guess that's the question. Is what are the use cases here? What do we actually need functionality-wise?
Yeah, I think in history, this parameter was introduced to control all the PVs. It's just after that, there's this, PVB, PVR stuff, and they forgot to update this.
That could be, that was before my time on the project, but
yeah.
I think you're right that, I mean, the volume snapshotter existed first, and then Restig was integrated FS backup later. So that may well be the history of this. I haven't looked into it.
Yeah, so this was not intentionally to control the, restoring of the snapshots, right? If that's the case, I think it's right to change the behavior of this parameter. Does it make sense, guys?
Always worries me whenever you end up changing that and people have built entire systems. So I don't know if it's going to break it or not. You guys tell me, but always a concern whenever you change like behavior on something that feels like it's been around for a really long time.
Yeah, I mean, one possibility would be, and again, this is where it kind of gets confusing with the whole deprecate. I mean, if we created a new parameter that did what the current parameter did and then deprecated the current parameter, could we then reintroduce the current parameter as a new parameter that does something? I mean, that gets confusing too. I don't know. In other words, how do you transition from, we have a parameter now that exists that we would like it to do something else, but we want to preserve. We might want to preserve current behavior under a parameter for users that might have some transition to work. So if we created a new if we did it in phases, maybe where we created a new parameter in 1.14 that behaved exactly the same way, but its name was clear, it only applied to snapshots, and we warned users of the old parameter, hey, if you want the current behavior, use the new parameter. And then in a future release, we changed the behavior of the current of the old parameter while the new parameter kept the old behavior. I don't know if that kind of transition would help that situation where, the concern, as I understand from what Sean is saying, is, hey, we don't want to, if a customer or user has a valid use case that depends on the current behavior, we don't want to break that. And I don't know if we have any users in that case, but if the feature's been here for years, got to be someone using it.
I think it's more like, what was it used for before we changed the behavior?
Yeah.
Will it still function in that way if a user has say a cron job set up to run this?
Yeah. And
will that break them in a surprising way? Like a silent way is the worst, right? But that's the question.
So the behavior change would be, now we're not, because say you have a backup that has two volumes. One is a CSI snapshot backup and one is a file system backup with Copia. Current behavior, if you set this restore behavior to false, is one of those gets restored, the other one does not. If we change this to apply to all volumes, the behavior changes now that Copia file system backup volume is no longer being restored. You could argue that the current behavior is a bug that we never got around to fixing because if this parameter predates file system backup, which it sounds like it may well, we added file system backup and someone forgot to apply this parameter there as well. So this is a bug that's been around, but when a bug's been around so long and people rely on the current undocumented functionality, that is still a risk. But you could argue that this is a bug, not a feature. But it gets kind of iffy because it's been around a long time.
Yeah.
I don't have strong opinions here. I see both sides. I just, I don't really know
the
what
curse of success, right? Like, and, if you're used a lot, any undocumented bug starts to look like a feature to certain users.
Right, but then how do you fix it for users that say, no, it really is a bug for us. What we want is to, remove all, to not back up any, restore any volumes here, which is what the flag says it does and what the flag used to do in version 0.8 or whenever. But, it doesn't do that now, but I want that now. And how do you do that without, so that's why I'm thinking one possibility isn't to introduce a new parameter that preserves the snapshot only aspect. And then possibly deprecate the current parameter and then reintroduce the parameter with a new functionality. But then now you're taking 3 releases to do it. And that's the downside.
Yeah. If there's very strong concern regarding changing the behavior, I'm okay keeping it as is. But I think, printing the worm conditionally may be unnecessary, and it will require more maintenance work because we may introduce other flags to control the backup behavior. So it would be easier just to print a warning telling you that, hey, this is only for snapshot, disregarding the value of this one. There may be excessive warning, but I think checking the condition can be tricky and may cause some confusion in future. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the proposed solution that I have, it will print warning per volume. So, it's not that great.
That's going to get users that are going to put
Yeah.
an issue,
Oh.
put bugs in saying,
Yeah.
I'm seeing all these warnings, but nothing's wrong.
Yeah.
As it is, I know we've had several issues come in where users want us to suppress warnings, and in most cases, I think those are wrong. But here's a case where a user say, "Hey, I don't want to see these warnings because I know what I'm doing," and they would be right. So I'm not sure here. If
it's okay.
As is, adding a new parameter that's more accurate for what we do and deprecating the current parameter would be a way of warning without it seeming excessive, because then you're warning they're using a deprecated parameter and informing them what parameter they should use instead. Restore PV is deprecated. Please use restore snapshot volumes instead.
To be honest, this grading warning is an additional step. Our CRD specification already states that this caters to snapshots. So if we want to mark it as won't fix, that's also
so what you're saying is that the documentation says, hey,
CRD
this
already
is what it
states
applies to. Any user who's confused didn't read the documentation.
Yeah.
I don't know that we need a warning to basically say what the documentation already says.
Okay, then we can close this one.
Okay, so I'm closing this one. I'm marking as a won't fix and say that
we already have a CRD specification. I can add a comment.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And in addition to that, there are 2 issues that are in the milestone already, and I think, it's a bit uncertain. Yesterday when I go through all of them, let me open it. Trying again, sorry. So for this one, regarding the existing policy, I think, this one, I see Tiger has some comments. Recreate option 2 existing after going through the user from other countries because we want coverage with the page.
So what we're saying is the proposed design solution that we were working on, which was to simply add a ability to delete and recreate an object when the update call fails. That's not useful enough for most people, and we'd rather not confuse user.
And in addition to that, there's some cases like, depending on the resource type, this behavior can be, a little inconsistent, right?
Right.
Because
yeah, I mean, basically, I think kind of the conclusion that we made, and we talked about this last week as well, was basically there seem to be two general use cases here that this high level thing is trying to cover. The more important one to us was, updating existing volumes, but we already had a separate proposal for, in place volume updates, which should cover that. In terms of Kubernetes resources, this was kind of intended originally, before we ended up scoping it out, to handle things like immutable resources, immutable fields, where the only way you can't do an update to. And so the original thinking was, hey, we can do it, delete and recreate, but we kept running into cases where this could be dangerous because, dependencies between items, or you have finalizers and it's stuck in deleting. So basically you have situations where attempting to do this could break things. So I think as long as we can resolve the PVC update case using that other in place updates functionality, I think we can close this for now.
Okay.
The important use case is being handled elsewhere. The rest of it is something that we are not intending to solve right now.
Okay. So I'm just kicking it off, and I'll add more comment to explain it if needed.
Yeah, we can add some comments to explain it, and then we can just probably close the issue.
So you think this is never needed, or is it still a valid? I think this is probably still a valid requirement
for immutable resources. I just don't know if it's important enough, considering all the negatives and all the complications around, dependencies and around finalizers and all this. So we could revisit it if an important use case comes up and says, hey, I really need this to work. I need to be able to update this particular resource type. But I don't know if there's a use case right now that's important enough to spend the effort to overcome those negatives.
I'm putting this in the backlog. But unfortunately, the next one I'm going to talk about is about the data only restore. Sorry. From my understanding, we're still in the scoping phase for this one. I think Xun will try to initiate more discussion about the expected behavior. So this one as well may have some challenge to implement in 1.14, in my opinion. I'm not trying to move it out at this moment, but just want to make sure we're on the same page that this one.
I think I agree. I think it's definitely a risk, especially since it sounds like the actual requirements and the needs aren't even fully fleshed out yet. So the discussion needs to continue, but that seems to me reasonable to say that that's at risk for having to get slipped or having to get dropped from the release.
Okay, so that covers my part. I think, we are aligned in terms of the plan. Thank you, guys.
Okay. So Daniel, you can stop sharing.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So the next one, Scott, please.
Yeah. Just a quick schedule note. Since in the U.S. we switched to daylight savings time starting this week, so because the U.S.-Europe meeting is scheduled based on 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern time, that's going to be 1 hour earlier Beijing time starting next week. Because we moved forward an hour and you didn't, so that'll be a little bit easier for you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott. By the way, does anyone know who is the owner of the Google Calendar of the Velero? I have seen there is a link
in the community meeting HTML.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that's. I don't know if that's one that the Orland was managing, but I did notice that from my calendar, the Beijing meeting is still listed, but the link, the Zoom link is wrong. And then the other meeting, the U.S. Eastern meeting, disappeared completely from my calendar. So I'm not sure how those were managed. But yeah, those need to be updated.
Yeah, I think we have already updated all other part, like in the Velero documentation, the HackMD,
with the calendar
and the
invites
Slack
themselves, I
channel.
guess.
Yeah, but the Canada, when I take a look at that part, I actually don't know who owns that part. Yonghui, can you scroll up? So there is a C Canada. Can you open that link?
Yeah, I added that link because there was no calendar here. So
Oh, so Tiger, that's you created that.
Oh, this is the new one that Tiger created.
Oh, okay. So
yeah, and
that one updated with the new link.
yeah,
Okay.
it's updated
Okay,
now.
that's great. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks. And the next one is from Tiger about the download server API. So Tiger, please.
Yes. So last time we were this issue around the download server API, we were hanging on the picking the approach to expose the URL, how to get the data to the client. So I'm just gonna let Sean and Wenkai kind of hash out, I guess, the two approaches we were discussing. There was the aggregated API method, and then there's another one where we use ingress and service, and we don't use the aggregated API, which is yeah, I'll let Sean and Wenkai kind of take over. I'm just gonna stand by and implement whatever is decided.
I read through the comments. I used to think the aggregated server doesn't need a separated certificate, but based on Sean's comment that we need that either way, right?
Yeah, you're gonna have to like set up a bunch of CAs and everything for the Cube API server to proxy the request to you.
But that's transparent for the client, right?
Yes, it can be transparent for the client.
Okay.
There is a lot of downsides to running an aggregated API server that make things very challenging. And the question that I keep coming back to is, what is the UX that you want to give the user? My understanding was that we already have the ability to follow a link from a download request. I don't know why we would add a sub resource that streams things when we could just give a user a URL to come hit.
With the current implementation, we only have that if the backup storage location is using something like S3 that has a URL that you can hit, and we have network access to that from the client. And the intent here is to resolve cases where neither of those, one or the other of those things are not true.
Sorry, I'm confused. So I believe that we have a download request CR.
Right.
Can
so
that.
currently, if the backup storage location is in S3, for example, the client creates a download request CR, Velero server processes it, grabs the appropriate URL in S3 or whatever, drops it in the download request. The client then grabs the URL and uses it. So one of the examples that we're dealing with here is we're trying to generate working on a plugin for a backup storage location that's not in S3, but it's actually just a local volume. So there's no server to serve that content. There's no live URL.
Correct.
So the Velero server is going to need to produce that URL to serve that content one way or another from the Velero pod or from some pod that we control. So we're creating a download server so that something that's just a file on a file system can be streamed to a user.
I'm sorry, I think I'm confused. So I'm advocating that we already have a mechanism to do that by hitting some URL to do this. Would you agree that there is a mechanism in place to do that?
Yeah, I think that the challenge for implementing the download request for the local volume is that we don't have a server. Previously, we just returned the URL from S3, so we don't need to worry about the accessibility for the S3
Correct.
endpoint.
I don't disagree. And so what I was advocating was that we would create that server or allow a plugin to tell us where that server existed, or many other options, but like creating our own server would be an option, especially for this particular use case. And we would give a URL to that, and then it would just follow the same path that we currently use for the public ones. Rather than trying to create some aggregated API that would have to have a new object, a new CRD, or sorry, a new type, because it wouldn't be a CRD in this case, it would be an actual like served thing with a new group, with a new and new like entire mechanism. And in
well, I'll let you finish. I'm just kind of curious. What if this replaces the old way of doing it? So there isn't two.
Would you want that though? Like, would
No.
you want the ingress egress cost of bringing it into our new aggregated API server to then stream out to the customer's client when you could just go to S3?
Well, I guess my thought was there's a download server that can talk to S3. There's a download server that knows how to talk to NFS. And when the client is asking for things, it's going directly to that. It's not going through Velero.
Well,
would
in the
you
NFS
do
case, it
that?
will be going to Velero because the NFS doesn't have a download server as part of it. So Velero is going to have to step in and provide something that serves that URL. I think whether we still use the download request resource to return that internal Velero URL rather than an S3 path is a different question, or maybe it's part of that. I'm not sure. Maybe that is part of this question.
No, I think we need to, continue using the download request. So we don't want to break that.
So then my question is, if you're choosing that, what's the value of having an aggregated API server?
Yeah, I was thinking that was simpler for the client side because we don't need to worry about, the certificate between client and server.
Oh, so you're worried about the CA?
Yeah, but
you're worried about
that may be due to my lack of knowledge in regards to the server aggregation in Kubernetes. But I was thinking that was something behind the API server, so that we don't need to worry about accessibility or connectivity because we already ensure the connectivity between the Velero client and the Kubernetes API server, as well as the certificate trust. I was thinking, the server aggregation was something that's more transparent in that regard. So we don't need to,
So you were thinking about giving a URL that would look something like a Kubernetes resource URL.
Yeah. So
that
so
would
we know that. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, I give a Kube API URL, so then we don't need to worry about the connectivity because we know user can issue Velero client, so he must have the connectivity to the Kube API server. Meanwhile, I thought we don't need to worry about the certificate. Yeah,
and then in your thought process would then be that like they wouldn't have to worry about some self-signed cert that like the Velero ingress would have to create through.
Right.
It would remove the step of users making sure that whatever ingress they were using to create the service would be accessible to the client. If I'm following you. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. That's a perfectly reasonable concern. I think the biggest concern is then the user now has to set up the installer of Velero would have to set up a CA certificate between Kubernetes and the Velero pod or the Velero, whatever aggregated API server. right? So they would still have to set up a CA between those two things. And that would have to be something that you would do, which maybe is okay if it's just, but I would imagine that it would be the same setup for that user as creating a CA that was accessible by their end users, if I understand certificates correctly. I could be wrong.
Yeah. If that's behind API server, I don't think that's something we need to worry, at least from the client side. I know there's more work for the installation, and I don't know if that's tricky. But I don't think client side need to worry about the cert exchange. It's about the trust relationship between the API server and the aggregation server, I think, if I understand the flow correctly.
Yeah, it would be. But then the client on the other one would just be like the installer would have to create a CA that was usable by their end users, right? That make sense or no?
Not very much.
So
maybe
yeah. If each client would has like a built-in CA store, right? And you end up going up the chain to see who signed it to eventually verify the CAs. In this case, you would have to set up a CA that was like actually usable by your clients, whoever's calling into your cluster. Whoever's using the Velero CRL or whoever's using the Velero CLI would have to have a trusted CA on their system that has like up the chain signed the CA that you would use by the thing. At least that's my understanding. So the end user or the installer would just have to create a CA for the ingress that was signed by one of the things that accessible by the end user. And my understanding is that like most clusters that people are installing and then exposing apps on are going to have ingresses that are already set up to do this, right?
So you're saying they need to set up an ingress anyway, right? That's your point.
I don't think if you do aggregated API, I don't think you do. I'm just saying that I think that the setting up the CA is a wash problem for the installer and for the client, I guess, because if the installer sets it up correctly, it would be a wash for the client.
When you say sorry, but when you say be a wash for the client,
I mean, it would be equal. It would be equivalently difficult or problematic. It would be the exact same problem that would have to be solved.
But I think for the application approach, the end user do not need to set up CA because they have already can connect to the API server, right?
Yeah.
Well, which user are you talking about?
The Velero end user.
The Velero end user wouldn't have to set up a CI in either case.
Sorry.
Oh. I think he does in the ingress approach.
Okay, why?
Because that's a client connecting to a separate server, the ingress, rather than the Kube API server. Yeah. So that
right,
certificate.
But if you set up your CA correctly, it should work with your already trusted CAs, right? On install time, you would have to create the CA correctly with your ingress to do that. I guess I'm right. Like every time you create a new route is, let's say, an OpenShift, you don't have to create a new CA for a client. Or every time you create an Nginx ingress, you don't have to create a new route for a client or a new CA for a client, right? Every time you connect to Google.com. You don't have to go have a specific CA that you set up for Google.com. There's a trusted set of things that you go up. So I'm confused by the assertion that you would need that. If you set up a self-signed CA, if the installer of Velero set up a self-signed CA, they would have to trust that CA on the client or do an insecure. That would be true.
Yeah, I think you're arguing that the ingress approach. Yeah, whenever we set up an ingress controller, the assumption is that the CA problem is already solved. That's your point, right?
Yeah.
Because you want to use that CA to expose other service. You need to handle that anyway.
Right. Yeah, effectively. And then my point is, like, if the Kubernetes API server in that case doesn't have already is insecure, it would still be insecure, right? But you still have to handle the same set of problems. Yeah. So let's say you set up your Kubernetes cluster with an insecure CA, right? Like a self-signed CA. You would still have the same problem from the client. They would still be insecure from that perspective. When you use the download request value, you would still have to go use insecure to contact it, right? So because I'm assuming that a download request would now have to still be a curl or some sort of GET, HTTP GET, right? We aren't going to change that to a kubectl thing that's using, because we just said that we were going to keep download requests and keep the S3 stuff. So if you did the aggregated API server, you're going to end up making an HTTP request to the Kubernetes API, which makes sense. But then if that Kubernetes API server is a self-signed cert, which is not uncommon, you would end up having the exact same problem that you're worried about here, right? That the Velero CLI would have to understand how to do insecure. Or unless I'm misunderstanding.
Sorry, but if if you use the certificate from the ingress controller, yes, you don't need to set your own CA, but sometimes you cannot. You need to set a separate certificate for the ingress, not use a certificate from the ingress controller, because you have a separate domain name or host name for your service. You cannot use a certificate from the ingress controller directly.
I don't disagree. I think you just have the same problem if you use an aggregated API server with the Kube API server.
I mean,
I just think that you are bringing up legitimate problems that need to be solved. Like, we are going to have to add the ability to do insecure getting of resources, without a doubt, right? Inside of whatever ends up downloading downloads the logs or downloads whatever the download request is telling us to download. And I think that no matter what, you're going to have this solve this problem. And I don't think that using an aggregated API server solves anything for you. And all it does is add complexity to your install. Because now you have to create a new type, you have to create a new group, you have to somehow install all of that with CRDs, which is possible, but is confusing, I would say. So, and then you still end up having the end user having to still has to choose whether or not to do insecure or not in certain cases, because the Kube API server is a self-signed cert. And now your client that's downloading the thing, which is the Velero CLI, I would assume, is still going to have to know about that self-signed cert and skip verification because it's not in the trusted store.
Yeah. Besides the CA certificate stuff, I think if we choose the ingress approach, some extra configuration items user need to set up. I used to some other Helm-chart project, and we provide some a lot configuration items about this part. For example, we provide support for ingress, but we also need to support load balancer and load pod or in cluster service, because different platform have different capabilities for this part. So this involve some extra configurations for different features, I think.
But I think we can just say this is a prerequisite. If you want to use the download server, you need to have an ingress already there.
But for the application approach, user, this is transparent for the user. User
right.
need to configure that.
Right, but I think Sean's concern is also valid, that we need to think about it. It's like a little hackish, because it seems like the aggregation is for supporting additional kinds and groups, and to support the controller pattern instead of just a download server. So if you think of that, maybe we just create a HTTP server. It's more straightforward, because then we only need to solve the connectivity, and we solve the connectivity via the ingress. Yeah,
or
I'm
cluster
still thinking.
IP or cluster IP, or like what I would imagine is you would be able, like, however a user wants to set up the connection, it would be some sort of config value to whatever Velero at that point, right? You would imagine, I don't know exactly how I would set it up, so bear with me, but I would imagine that Velero would need to know what that looks like in some way, and then just tell user, like, then it would just point users to that. And so like users would just be like, here's how you access the download server. And then when the controller handles the download request CRs, it would know how to hand those out. Because you're right, there's like 1,000 ways to do ingress into a pod, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to standardize on one.
But if we choose the aggregation way, we need an extra layer. I mean, either way, we need to set up a pod HTTP server to serve the content. That part is for sure. But for the aggregation layer, the extra work, we need to set up like a new
kind
group, a new kind.
Yeah, you have to like register all that with the API server using an aggregation API resource, and yeah, all of that. Set up a CA to talk to each other. Yeah. And then like there's really fun things, like if your server goes down, like really fun things can happen, like blocking resource, like blocking namespace deletion. Because if the thing can't contact your aggregated API server, then you and you have the resources still installed in the cluster, basically the deletion thing can't find it. It gets a 500. It says, I can't delete this namespace because I don't know if everything's gone yet. So you're ending up just like hanging namespace deletion with aggregated API servers. It's a really fun bug.
Yeah, so it sounds like the aggregation server, if we choose to use the aggregation server, it's like a hackish way to implement the download server.
I think that it's pretty common to serve HTTP pods and give out ways to contact HTTP to pods inside Cube. And so I would probably just stick with that rather than trying to create new resource types just to hand out HTTP URLs. Would be my distillation of how I see the problem.
So but I don't see an very easy or simple way for a user to handle the ingress approach in terms of the configuration. Yeah, I think if we choose the ingress way, we need a simple enough user experience, because based on my experience working on a Helm chart, there is always problematic for supporting different ingress controllers and other stuff. That part is always problematic. That's why we try to use the aggregation layer to dodge that kind of problems.
I can see that. I think can I restate your concern? Just make sure we're on the same page. So I think what you're saying is, because there's a bunch of different ingresses, and if users use a Helm chart to install, then we have to be able to handle all these different ones when we're setting up the application.
It's not about it's not about whether use a Helm chart to install Velero. It's about when user installs Velero, I mean, we need to support different ingress controllers, because that part is beyond our control.
We have to have some way to kind of like retroactively allow users to tell us how they want the download server to be talked to after install. So like what I would imagine is we would install it and have, okay, here's your Kubernetes service, right? This is the Kubernetes service for the download URL. Tell us how it's going to look for the end user to contact outside of the cluster. Yeah, that is a challenging problem. I would imagine that other people have to do this though, right? Like Helm charts that install applications that run on top of Kube that hand out HTTP have to be able to handle this in some way. Or am I just not thinking about it correctly? I could be.
No, that's a tricky part, because we used to work on the Helm charts like that you mentioned, and we add a lot of configuration to support different scenarios. So that's why we try not to use it this time.
Yeah. And that's where the how do we make sure that the CAs work and everything? Ingress has one CA and blah blah blah.
Yeah. The reason we want to choose to use aggregation server is probably because we never use it before, and we think
it'll be easier than yeah. And I've used aggregated API server, and I'm saying no, this is bad. Yeah, okay. I think I see. Is there any prior art of like after installing with Helm being able to hand over just like the base URL to the service? So if like the Helm chart just set up the service, if the download server was set up, then they would have to do a follow-on step that would be like, okay, and here's how you access it. And it's their responsibility to set up their ingress the way it needs to be set up.
Nah. Yeah, I think maybe we can do this, but that will be bad user experience, because I imagine user will need to choose at least a host name or a prefix in the URL in the Velero installation time, so that we don't need to restart Velero to read that URL to generate the URL in the download request. I think either way we need to allow user must set that URI when they choose to use Velero's download server during installation. But after that, you're saying Velero don't wanna handle the connectivity.
I think it would make sense to just have a Kubernetes service and stick with that, right? Or maybe we can use like the new endpoints API or the new whatever API. I forget what it is, the gateway APIs. I don't know if those are fully baked yet. My understanding was that those were supposed to be like the canonical way that a bunch of different controllers would allow you to plug into, but I don't know if those are baked yet. I could be wrong.
I like the idea that we just set a prefix and let user ensure the connectivity after the installation of Velero, so that we don't need to worry about it. I like this idea, but I don't know if that's very feasible for the user.
Yeah. I hear you.
Yeah.
It's just the aggregated API server also feels really bad.
I think we will discuss and verify with you about the concern regarding the aggregation. We still need to do a little study on that part.
Okay.
But if that proved to be very difficult and problematic, then I think we can choose the other way. But we don't want to face the difficulty in terms of trying to solve the connectivity issue for user automatically, but end up causing a lot of mess. That's something we want to avoid, I think.
Yeah, I'm really curious if this is. Can you on the opposite end, can you give me like a Helm chart that shows me the like problem as well? Would that be something you could post in like the Slack channel so I could take a look at it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just so I can do the opposite side and see if I can see that and play with it some.
Sure.
Because I think I understand the concern now. It's the install time with the Helm chart. How do we get this set up so a user with like a single Helm install with the Helm chart can do the thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not only Helm chart specific. It's about the installation time of Velero. Either way we choose. I think the challenge, either way we need to expose some way for user to configure that server. And if we create the ingress automatically for the user, then in that user will say, oh, it doesn't work in my environment. That's something you want to avoid.
Yeah. Does not
so
work here.
I think maybe we do not need to set up the ingress for the user at all. We just let user provide a string, and after the installation, we tell user, you need to make sure this string is accessible from your client side, either by ingress, load balancer, whatever way you want.
Yeah, cluster IP, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, that's not very friendly for the user, but I think Velero doesn't need to worry about it. I think that's maybe one valid option. I think we can think about it.
Yeah, and in that way, does it work for some on-premise environment that the client had very little connectivity to the server side?
I mean, if user choose to use the download server, he need to have. Yeah. It's like we are pushing the work for the user, but either way, someone need to make sure the connectivity issue is resolved. I mean, if you want to do that during installation of Velero, that can be tricky because the way to solve the connectivity issue is very environment dependent. I mean, depending on the user's environment, you need to choose different ways. We can have an opinionated way, like setting up an ingress, and we think it works. But maybe it's very likely it turns out it doesn't work. Maybe the way we set up ingress, maybe it's some setting on the ingress controller that we don't have control on Velero. End up causing the problem that the download server is not accessible. Instead, maybe we can choose, we just assume user can solve that problem somehow. We just set up the Velero pod and there's a service, and user will need to make sure, user will need to figure out how to connect that from the client side. I mean, that may be good enough for the open source Velero. If a downstream product wanna handle that, we will, I imagine the environment will be more,
You'll
they're
have
more
a set. You'll have a defined ingress that you must use and whatever else, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. There should be a way to do that already.
Yeah, I know that like over at the Red Hat side, right? Like we'll just use a route. Like that's how we do all of our ingress. So for us, this is like, oh, this is obviously how you solve it. So this problem didn't make it into my thought process. So I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay, and yeah, and another question from me. Not sure if you have discussed or not. Since we have lots of, we need quite lots of configurations for the download server, and which is very different from Velero server. So are we considering to make the download API servers as a separate module and with a separate installation?
I mean, you could probably do that, right?
Because I'm just worried that if we add this configuration together with Velero installation, users will have problem or difficulties to install, or more problem or difficulties to install with Velero.
But I imagine for all the existing Velero users, they will not need to set up download server, so they don't need to worry about setting the additional parameters. But for the user that we are thinking about to be use the NFS plugin, they need to set the parameters either way. That's the installation experience. I think I slightly prefer, setting up everything in one install command. But I think we can continue the discussion in this design if you're interested adding more comments. I don't think we have make the decision right now.
Okay, yeah. I can add a comment so that we can continue this.
Yeah. But thanks, Sean, letting us know the dark side about the aggregation.
There's a reason CRDs were made, right? Is what I'll say. And that they kind of stopped pushing people towards aggregate APIs, because this was the initial way of adding third-party APIs to Kubernetes, was aggregate APIs. And then they were like, oh man, this is really hard. This has lots of sharp edges. So let's make CRDs and kind of reduce the scope of the problem and serve it from inside the Kubernetes API server, basically, instead of trying to like push it out and do the proxying. At least that's my understanding of the history.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you.
With this said, can I summarize the discussion and see if we agree on it? Okay, so my understanding is I think we agree that the aggregate API isn't the cleanest way to do it, but could be nice to use because of the install time problem of which ingress to use if we were to use just a generic server, HTTP server. is that a fair summary, or is that not a fair summary?
That sounds good to me, Wenkai. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. And I think I understand now the concern, and thank you guys for walking me through it and helping me follow and teaching me about the Helm chart problem of ingress. I've never had to deal with it, so I never once considered it. So thank you.
Yeah, Tiger, I think we can continue the discussion somehow on the Slack, and hopefully in 1 or 2 weeks, I think we can make decision and to unblock your design. You think that will work?
Yep, sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thanks, everyone. And any other things or any other thing we want to discuss before we go? If not, I think we can complete the meeting here today. And thanks for joining. And have a nice day and a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.